Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning, and everything you've built, every relationship you've nurtured, every possession you've accumulated, every achievement you've celebrated has vanished. Gone. Not stolen, not destroyed, simply erased from existence. Your bank account shows zero. Your home is empty. The people you love don't remember your name. The career you spent decades building never existed. Your identity, the very story you've been telling yourself about who you are, dissolves like sugar in water. How long would it take before the panic sets in? Minutes? Seconds? Would you collapse under the weight of that emptiness? Or would something else emerge from beneath the rubble of your vanished life? Now, here's the unsettling truth. This scenario isn't a hypothetical nightmare. It's already happening. Right now. This very moment. Everything you're clinging to is slipping through your fingers at a rate you refuse to acknowledge. Your body is aging with each breath. The people you love are changing, moving further from the versions of them you fell in love with. Your thoughts from 5 minutes ago have already disappeared into the void of forgotten consciousness. Even your sense of self, that persistent feeling of, I am this person, is different from who you were a year ago, a month ago, yesterday. Today, we are going to uncover one of the most profound lessons ever shared with humanity. The lesson of non-attachment, the greatest teaching of Buddha. Throughout the centuries, philosophers, mystics, and spiritual teachers have wrestled with one simple truth. Everything in this world changes. Yet as humans, we cling to what we love and resist what we fear. We chase pleasure and run from pain. We hold on to people, possessions, success, and even identities, believing that in our grasp lies safety. But this grasping, this attachment, is precisely what binds us to suffering. Before we go deeper into this timeless wisdom, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this video with someone who might need to hear this message today. The insights we're about to explore can transform not only the way you see life, but also how you experience every moment of it. Stay until the end, because the last revelation we'll discuss is perhaps the most powerful one of all. Despite this constant disintegration, you hold on. You grip tighter. You tell yourself that if you just love hard enough, work hard enough, control enough variables, you can stop the inevitable slide into impermanence. You've built an entire life on the assumption that permanence is possible, that security can be achieved, that somewhere in this churning chaos of existence, there's a solid ground where you can finally rest and say, this is mine, this will last. But what if this very act of holding on, this desperate clutching at the illusion of permanence, is the source of nearly all your suffering? What if the cage you're trying to escape has no walls, no locks, no guards? What if you've been creating your own prison cell with every attachment, every expectation, every refusal to let life flow through your open hands? Consider this. A man spends 20 years building a company, pouring his identity into it, sacrificing relationships and health, all to reach some imagined finish line of success. Then it collapses. He loses everything. By all conventional measures, this is tragedy. But here's the paradox. Some of these men report the collapse as the moment they finally became free. They describe a strange lightness, an unexpected peace that emerged only when the thing they'd been clinging to for decades was ripped away. How is this possible? How can loss become liberation? Or think about this. Two people lose the same thing, a relationship, a parent, a dream. One person is destroyed by it, drowning in suffering for years, unable to move forward. The other grieves deeply, but emerges somehow transformed, more compassionate, more alive than before. Same loss, radically different outcomes. The difference isn't in what happened to them. The difference is in how tightly they were holding on, how completely they had fused their identity with what they lost. This raises an uncomfortable question. If suffering isn't caused by loss itself, but by our relationship to loss, then haven't we been looking for happiness in entirely the wrong place? Haven't we been building castles on sand, then cursing the ocean for doing what oceans do? 26 centuries ago, a man sat beneath a tree and saw through this illusion completely. He watched the entire architecture of human suffering collapse into a single insight. We suffer not because life is painful, but because we insist that it be something other than what it is. We suffer because we attach ourselves to the changing and expect it to stay still. We suffer because we mistake our thoughts about reality for reality itself. This man was called Buddha, and his revelation wasn't a religious doctrine or a philosophical theory. It was an anatomical map of human suffering and the precise instructions for its cessation. Yet his message has been misunderstood, diluted, and commodified into bumper sticker wisdom. Let go and be happy. As if freedom were that simple. As if non-attachment were the same as not caring. But what if non-attachment is actually the most radical act of love possible? What if letting go doesn't mean losing anything, but gaining everything? What if the peace you've been seeking your entire life has been waiting patiently beneath every desperate grasp, every fearful clinging, every refusal to accept what is? The question isn't whether you can afford to let go. The question is, can you afford to keep holding on? To understand why we cling so desperately to what we cannot keep, we must first excavate the psychological machinery that makes attachment feel like survival itself. This isn't merely a philosophical puzzle, it's hardwired into the architecture of your brain, embedded in the stories your culture tells you, and reinforced by every institution that promises you security in exchange for your compliance. Carl Jung once observed that what you resist persists. But the deeper truth he was pointing to is this. The human psyche doesn't just resist change, it actively constructs an identity against it. From the moment you develop self-awareness as a child, you begin the project of building a self. You collect experiences, relationships, achievements, and possessions, arranging them like furniture in a house you call me. This house feels solid. It feels real. And the thought of it crumbling terrifies you at a primal level. Why? Because the ego, that part of you that says, I am this and not that, survives only through differentiation and accumulation. It needs to own, to possess, to claim territory in the landscape of existence. I am a successful person. I am someone's partner. I am my achievements. Each statement is an act of grasping, a desperate attempt to solidify something inherently fluid. The ego mistakes these temporary identifications for its existence, so when they're threatened, it experiences existential terror. Arthur Schopenhauer saw this clearly when he wrote about the will to life, that blind, insatiable force driving all living things toward survival and reproduction. But in humans, this will metastasizes into something more insidious, the will to permanence. We don't just want to survive, we want to freeze time, to make the good moments last forever and the bad moments never arrive. We want to cheat the fundamental law of existence, impermanence. This creates what Buddha called dukkha, often translated as suffering, but more accurately described as a pervasive dissatisfaction, a background hum of unease that colors every experience. You achieve something you've worked toward for years, and within days, sometimes hours, the satisfaction fades, and you're already looking toward the next goal. You fall in love, and beneath the joy lurks the fear. What if I lose this person? Even pleasure becomes tinged with anxiety because you know it cannot last. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre identified this as the human condition of bad faith, our tendency to pretend we are fixed, stable things when we are actually free, fluid beings, condemned to constant choice and change. We lie to ourselves about our nature because the truth is too unsettling. We are not solid objects moving through time. We are processes, verbs masquerading as nouns, temporary patterns of energy desperately trying to convince ourselves of our own permanence. And society doesn't just allow this delusion, it depends on it. Think about the entire structure of modern civilization. It's built on the promise of permanence through accumulation. Buy this house, and you'll have security. Achieve this status, and you'll have worth. Find this relationship, and you'll have completion. The economy itself would collapse if people suddenly realized that no amount of possession can fill the void of impermanence. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered something profound about this mechanism of attachment. In the camps, where everything could be taken, possessions, dignity, even life itself, he observed that those who survived weren't necessarily the strongest or most resourceful. They were those who had found meaning that transcended circumstance, who had stopped attaching their will to live to external conditions. He wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. But here's what makes attachment so pernicious. It masquerades as love, as ambition, as care. You tell yourself you're holding on because you care deeply, because these things matter. And they do matter, but your relationship to them has become poisoned. You've confused connection with possession, love with control, engagement with entanglement. The neuroscience reveals why this feels so compelling. Your brain's reward system floods with dopamine when you acquire something or achieve a goal. But this same system creates tolerance. You need more and more to feel the same satisfaction. Meanwhile, your amygdala, the fear center, becomes hyperactive at the thought of loss. You're caught in a neurochemical trap, chasing diminishing returns of pleasure while fleeing amplifying sensations of threat. This is the hidden problem. You're not just attached to things, people, and outcomes. You're attached to attachment itself. You've made it your strategy for surviving in a world that feels fundamentally uncertain. And no one ever taught you that there might be another way, a way to engage fully with life without being enslaved by it, to love without possessing, to act without demanding specific results. The rebellion against this starts with a simple, devastating recognition. Everything you're holding on to is already gone. The cost of attachment isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with sirens and flashing lights. Instead, it bleeds you slowly, imperceptibly, like a wound you've learned to ignore because you've been carrying it your entire life. You wake up one day and realize you haven't truly relaxed in years. You haven't experienced joy without the shadow of, "What if I lose this?" hovering at the edges. You haven't loved without fear, dreamed without hedging, or lived without constantly calculating the risk of loss. This is the quiet catastrophe of attachment. It doesn't destroy your life in one violent moment. It hollows it out from within, turning every beautiful experience into a hostage situation where you're both the captor and the captive. Consider what happens in your relationships when attachment takes control. You meet someone who makes you feel alive, and within weeks or months, something shifts. The ease becomes effort. The joy becomes need. You stop experiencing this person as they are and start experiencing them as a solution to your incompleteness. Every time they pull away, slightly absorbed in their own thoughts, busy with their own life, your nervous system interprets it as abandonment. You become vigilant, scanning for signs of disconnection, unconsciously testing their commitment, suffocating the very spontaneity that drew you together in the first place. This is what psychologists call anxious attachment. But it's more than a relationship style. It's a way of relating to existence itself. You've turned love into a security system, and the person you claim to cherish has become the thing standing between you and your fear of aloneness. The tragedy is that this very grasping pushes them away. People can sense when they're being clung to rather than loved. They feel the weight of your need, and instinctively, they resist it. But the damage extends far beyond relationships. Look at how attachment shapes your entire emotional landscape. You achieve something significant, a promotion, a creative breakthrough, recognition you've craved, and for a brief moment, you feel victorious. Then, almost immediately, the mind does what it's been trained to do. It begins to worry about maintaining this new status. What if you can't replicate this success? What if it was just luck? What if people's opinions change? The achievement you worked so hard for becomes a new source of anxiety because you've attached your identity to it. This is the cognitive bias called hedonic adaptation, your brain's tendency to return to a baseline level of happiness regardless of positive changes in circumstances. But it's not just neutral adaptation. It's a trap. You keep raising the bar, convinced that the next achievement, the next milestone, will finally deliver lasting satisfaction. It never does. You're running on a treadmill that speeds up with every step, and you can't understand why you're exhausted. Neurologically, your brain has been hijacked by what researchers call the default mode network, a system of neural pathways that activate when you're not focused on the external world. This network is responsible for self-referential thinking, planning, worrying, and ruminating. It's the voice that never stops asking, "What about me? What does this mean for me? How do I protect what's mine?" When attachment dominates, this network becomes hyperactive, pulling you out of the present moment hundreds of times a day, creating a persistent background of anxiety. And society has learned to weaponize this. Every advertisement is designed to create attachment to an imagined future where you possess something you currently lack. Every social media platform exploits your attachment to identity, encouraging you to curate a version of yourself that must be constantly maintained and defended. Every news cycle feeds your attachment to particular narratives, particular tribes, particular ways of seeing the world, and the fear of what happens if these narratives are challenged. The philosopher Aldous Huxley warned about this in his dystopian visions. We wouldn't be destroyed by what we hate, but by what we love, or more precisely, by our attachment to comfort, pleasure, and the illusion of control. We've built a civilization that promises to eliminate uncertainty, to provide security through accumulation, to offer happiness through possession. And in the process, we've become more anxious, more depressed, more disconnected than ever before. But perhaps the most insidious consequence of attachment is what it does to your sense of time. When you're constantly grasping at the future or clinging to the past, you lose access to the only moment that actually exists, now. Your mind becomes a time machine stuck on malfunction, endlessly replaying what was or anxiously projecting what might be. You sit with your child, but you're thinking about work. You're at work, but you're thinking about what you'll do when you get home. You're at home, but you're scrolling through images of other people's lives, comparing, calculating, missing entirely the life that's happening in real time. This temporal dislocation creates what we might call life lag. You're always a few steps behind or ahead of where you actually are, never quite catching up to the present. And the present is where all genuine experience happens. It's where love exists, where beauty reveals itself, where peace has always been waiting. But you can't access any of it because you're too busy protecting what you had or pursuing what you don't have. The stakes become clear. Attachment doesn't just make you unhappy. It makes you absent from your own life. You're so busy trying to control the uncontrollable that you miss the miracle of what's actually here. You're so terrified of loss that you never fully arrive at what you have. And one day, at the end, you'll look back and realize you spent most of your life living in your head, rehearsing disasters that never came and mourning losses before they happened. While the actual texture of existence, the sound of rain, the warmth of connection, the simple fact of being alive passed by unnoticed. This is the urgency Buddha saw. Not that we'll suffer at some point in the future, but that we're suffering right now, in this moment, and we don't even realize it because we've normalized the background hum of anxiety that attachment creates. We've mistaken this contracted, fearful state for normalcy, for adulthood, for realism. But what if there's a way to step out of this trap entirely? The rebellion against attachment doesn't begin with renouncing everything you love or retreating to a mountaintop. It begins with a single, radical act, seeing your attachments clearly for what they are, not condemning them, not suppressing them, but observing them with the same detached curiosity you might watch a storm from a safe distance. This is where freedom starts, not in the absence of desire, but in the presence of awareness. Buddha called this practice mindfulness. But the word has been so sanitized and commercialized that we've forgotten its revolutionary power. True mindfulness isn't about relaxation or stress reduction. It's about waking up from the trance of identification. It's about catching yourself in the act of grasping and recognizing, in that precise moment, that you have a choice to tighten your grip or to open your hand. Try this now as you read these words. Notice what you're thinking about beneath your attention to this text. Is there a worry lurking in the background? A plan you're mentally rehearsing? A conversation you're replaying? That's your mind doing what it's been trained to do, attaching to narratives about past and future, building cases for why you need to control what cannot be controlled. But here's the breakthrough. You just noticed it. And in that noticing, you created a gap between the thought and your identification with it. That gap is freedom. It's the space where you remember that you are not your thoughts, not your emotions, not your circumstances. You are the awareness in which all of these arise and pass away. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus understood this when he taught his students to distinguish between what is up to us and what is not up to us. Your opinions, your intentions, your responses, these are up to you. Everything else, outcomes, other people's reactions, the flow of events, is not. When you stop trying to control what isn't yours to control, you reclaim enormous energy that's been wasted on futile resistance. But breaking free from attachment requires more than intellectual understanding. It requires what we might call experiential surgery. actively dismantling the beliefs that keep you trapped. One of the most powerful practices is what Buddha called contemplating impermanence, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality you investigate directly. Look at your hand right now. Really look at it. The cells composing it are dying and being replaced constantly. The skin you see today isn't the skin you had 7 years ago. Your entire body is a river, not a rock, a process of continuous change that you've labeled my body as if it were a fixed possession. Now, extend this recognition to everything else. The relationships you're clinging to are changing every moment. The person you loved yesterday is not quite the same person today. The you who entered this relationship is not the you reading this now. When you truly see impermanence, not as a depressing truth, but as the fundamental nature of reality, something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to freeze the river. You stop mourning the fact that water flows. Instead, you begin to appreciate each moment for its fleeting beauty, knowing it will never come again in exactly this way. The Japanese have a word for this: mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of transience. It's not sadness, it's a poignant appreciation that arises when you stop demanding permanence. Another practice that shatters attachment is what Buddhists call detaching from identity. This sounds abstract, but it's intensely practical. You've spent your entire life building a story about who you are, your roles, your achievements, your personality traits, your wounds. I am an anxious person. I am successful. I am someone who was hurt. Each of these statements is a cage disguised as self-knowledge. The rebellion is asking, what remains if I let go of every story I tell about myself? Who am I before the narrative? This isn't nihilism or loss of self. It's discovering that beneath all the constructed identities, there's something more fundamental, a pure capacity to be present, to witness, to respond. When you stop defending a fixed idea of who you are, you become fluid enough to meet each situation freshly, without the burden of consistency with your self-image. History offers us powerful examples of those who broke free from attachment and, in doing so, transformed their suffering into wisdom. Viktor Frankl, in the concentration camps, watched everything be stripped away: family, freedom, dignity. What he discovered was that even in the most extreme circumstances, he retained one freedom: the freedom to choose his inner attitude. This wasn't positive thinking or denial. It was the recognition that meaning doesn't depend on circumstances and peace doesn't require preferred conditions. Or consider the philosopher Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragility systems that gain from disorder rather than merely resisting it. When you're attached, you're fragile. Every unexpected change threatens to shatter you. But when you release attachment, while maintaining engagement, you become anti-fragile. Challenges strengthen you. Loss deepens you. Change reveals your adaptability, rather than exposing your brittleness. The practical application is this: instead of asking, how do I protect what I have? Start asking, how do I engage fully without demanding specific outcomes? This is the middle way Buddha taught not detachment from life, but detachment from the demand that life conform to your expectations. You can love deeply without insisting the person never change. You can pursue goals passionately without making your peace contingent on achieving them. You can care intensely about outcomes while remaining internally free regardless of results. This is where acceptance enters not as resignation, but as radical embrace of reality as it is. The philosopher Alan Watts described it perfectly. The more you try to control the world, the less control you have. But when you stop clinging, life begins to flow naturally. Acceptance means you stop exhausting yourself, fighting what already is. You save that energy for creative response rather than futile resistance. And here's the paradox that will change everything. When you stop needing things to be different, you become far more effective at changing them. Why? Because you're acting from clarity rather than desperation, from love rather than fear, from freedom rather than need. Your actions carry a different quality: lighter, more spontaneous, more aligned with what's actually possible, rather than what your ego demands. The rebellion, then, is this: live as if everything matters, while simultaneously knowing that nothing can be permanently grasped. Pour yourself fully into each moment while holding it lightly. Love with your whole being while remembering that all forms are temporary expressions of something eternal. This isn't a compromise. It's the discovery of a mode of existence you never knew was possible. Now we arrive at the deepest truth, the revelation that changes not just how you think about life, but how you experience existence itself. Everything we've explored so far has been preparation for this moment, the understanding that will either liberate you completely or haunt you until you're ready to let it in. Here it is. You have never actually possessed anything. Not one single thing. Not ever. Let that settle. Really feel the weight of it. Every person you've loved, every achievement you've celebrated, every possession you've acquired, every moment of joy you've experienced, none of it was ever truly yours. It all moved through you like water through open hands. You were never the owner. You were always just the witness, the temporary steward, the brief host to experiences passing through consciousness. Think about it. Can you possess a sunset? You watch it. You're moved by it, but it doesn't belong to you. Can you possess a moment of laughter with a friend? It happens. It dissolves. And what remains is only a memory which itself is constantly changing, reconstructed differently each time you recall it. Can you even possess your own thoughts? They arise without your permission, shift without your control, and disappear into nothingness whether you want them to or not. The Buddha saw this with absolute clarity and called it anatta, the understanding of no fixed self, no permanent possession. This isn't a depressing realization. It's the most liberating truth you'll ever encounter. Because if nothing has ever been yours to keep, then you've never actually lost anything either. Loss is impossible when there was no possession in the first place. Imagine the ocean. When a wave rises from the sea, does the ocean gain something? When the wave crashes back, does the ocean lose something? No. The wave was always the ocean, temporarily taking a particular form. And you are like that wave. You emerged from the vast ocean of existence, took this particular form with this particular name and story, and one day you'll return to that vastness. Nothing is lost because nothing was ever separate. This is what every mystic across every tradition has tried to communicate. The feeling of being a separate self, isolated and vulnerable, needing to protect what's mine from what's not mine. This is the fundamental illusion. Not because you don't exist, but because you're not what you think you are. You're not a fragment trying to survive in a hostile universe. You're the universe experiencing itself through this particular aperture of consciousness. When this understanding moves from intellectual concept to lived reality, everything transforms. Suddenly, the desperate quality of life dissolves. You're still engaged, still caring, still loving, but without the underlying panic. You can throw yourself into work, relationships, creative expression, not because you need these things to complete you, but because you recognize them as the natural expression of existence playing with its own infinite forms. The philosopher Alan Watts spent his life trying to articulate this paradox. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple, and yet everybody rushes around in a great panic as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. You've been trying to achieve peace through accumulation, when peace was always the nature of what you are beneath all, the noise of wanting. This is what Buddha called nirvana, not a place you go after death, not a reward for good behavior, but the extinguishing of the fires of craving, aversion, and ignorance. It's the recognition that the anxious, grasping self you've been defending your whole life is just a story. And you can put the story down anytime, not by destroying yourself, but by seeing through the illusion of separation that made you feel you needed to grasp in the first place. Think of it like this. You've been living as if you're a character in a dream, trying desperately to make the dream go your way, terrified of the dream ending. But what happens when you wake up? Do you mourn the dream character? No. You recognize it was always you, dreaming. The stakes weren't what you thought they were. The separation wasn't real, and all the suffering came from forgetting you were dreaming. This doesn't make life meaningless. It makes it infinitely meaningful, because when you're no longer trapped in the narrow agenda of protecting a separate self, you become available to the full spectrum of existence. You can grieve without being destroyed by grief. You can celebrate without fearing the celebration's end. You can love without the terror of loss, because you recognize that love itself is what you are. not something you have or can lose, but the very substance of consciousness meeting itself. The psychological breakthrough here is profound. When you realize you've never possessed anything, you also realize you've never been at risk of losing anything fundamental. Your true nature, this awareness, this capacity to be present, has never been threatened. It was here before your first memory. It will be here after your last breath. Everything else, thoughts, sensations, experiences, relationships, is content appearing in this awareness, like images projected on a screen. The images change constantly, but the screen remains untouched. This is why Buddha's teaching isn't about renunciation, it's about recognition. You don't need to give up your life, your relationships, your dreams. You need to recognize what they actually are. Temporary dances of form within formlessness, brief expressions of the eternal, finite waves in an infinite ocean. When you see this clearly, attachment falls away naturally, not because you force it, but because you understand its futility. And here's the beautiful paradox. When you stop clinging to life out of fear, you finally begin to live. You taste food more fully when you're not worried about the meal ending. You experience love more deeply when you're not desperately trying to make it permanent. You engage with work more creatively when your identity doesn't depend on the outcome. Everything becomes more vivid, more precious, more real, precisely because you've stopped trying to freeze it. The psychiatrist Abraham Maslow called this self-transcendence, the moment when a person rises above the prison of ego and touches something larger than themselves. It's the experience reported by mystics, artists in flow states, people in moments of profound presence, a sense of unity, of rightness, of being exactly where you need to be, not because circumstances are perfect, but because you've stopped demanding they be different. This is what awaits on the other side of attachment. Not emptiness, but fullness. Not coldness, but warmth without fear. Not detachment from life, but the deepest possible engagement, the kind that arises when you're no longer protecting a false center, no longer defending a constructed identity, no longer at war with impermanence. Consider what your life would look like if you truly integrated this understanding. You'd still pursue goals, but without the heaviness of needing them to validate your existence. You'd still love people, but without the suffocating need to control them or freeze them in time. You'd still feel pain when loss comes because you're human, but the pain wouldn't compound into suffering through resistance. You'd grieve cleanly, then let life continue to flow through you. You'd become like water taking the shape of whatever container holds you, but never losing your essential nature. Soft enough to yield, yet powerful enough to carve canyons. This is the wisdom Buddha pointed to, not transcending life, but learning to move through it with the fluidity of someone who knows that nothing can ultimately be grasped, and therefore nothing needs to be. The final truth is this: peace is not at the end of the path. Peace is the path. It's not something you achieve after you've perfected non-attachment. It's what remains when you stop creating suffering through attachment. It's been here all along, beneath the noise of wanting, waiting patiently for you to recognize it. So what are you holding on to right now that's preventing you from accessing this peace? What story about who you are, what you need, what you can't live without is keeping you trapped in the cycle of craving and fear? The answer is already appearing in your awareness. You know what it is. The question is, are you ready to open your hand? Because when you finally do, when you release just one attachment and feel the lightness that follows, you'll understand what Buddha meant when he spoke of liberation. You won't lose anything real. You'll only lose the weight of trying to possess what was always flowing freely. And in that moment, you'll discover something extraordinary. You were never separate from what you were seeking. The peace you've been chasing through acquisition, through achievement, through relationships, it was always the nature of the awareness looking out through your eyes. You are not a wave trying to find the ocean. You are the ocean, temporarily believing you're just a wave. This is the greatest lesson of Buddha. Don't get attached to anything, not because life doesn't matter, but because you are life itself. You don't need to hold on to experiences because you are the experiencing. You don't need to grasp at love because you are love in human form. You don't need to fear change because you are the changeless awareness in which all change appears. When you see this, really see it, suffering doesn't end because your circumstances improve. Suffering ends because you recognize it was always optional, always created by resistance to what is, always dissolved in the simple act of letting life be exactly as it is. This is freedom, not from life, but in life. Not after death, but right now, in this very moment. It's been waiting for you all along, hidden in plain sight, accessible the instant you stop reaching for it and recognize you're already home. Take a breath. Feel the aliveness in your body. Notice the awareness reading these words. That's it. That's what you've been looking for. Not somewhere else, not in some future moment of achievement, but here, now, in the simple fact of being. Everything you've ever needed to know is contained in this. When you stop clinging, you don't lose life. You finally find it.